Richard Parker was walking his usual route through the Veterans Memorial Park when he noticed an elderly German shepherd limping near the monument. The dog disappeared suddenly when a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby, leaving only paw prints in the snow and a weathered dog tag. 3 months later. Richard couldn't sleep as nightmares of barking dogs haunted his dreams. When his daughter Emily found an old military photograph in their new home's attic showing the same German shepherd standing beside a soldier who looked exactly like Richard's late father, it made his blood run cold. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Redwood Falls. Montana wasn't much to look at, a small town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, with Fort Harrison Military Base just 30 miles down the highway. In winter, the place transformed into a postcard of white desolation, with snow piling up against storefronts and icicles hanging like crystal daggers from every rooftop. It was the kind of cold that made bones ache, especially old bones. The Parker family hadn't planned on settling here. Richard Parker, at 42, carried himself with the rigid posture of his Army medic days, though unemployment had recently added a slight stoop to his shoulders. His wife Sarah worked double shifts at Redwood General, her nurse's scrubs often dusted with snow as she trudged home in the darkness of early morning. Their 16-year-old son Mike had taken to wearing black and disappearing for hours, his way of protesting the move from Phoenix. Only 12-year-old Emily seemed to adapt, though she remained quiet, drawing pictures of deserts and cacti as if to keep Arizona alive in her mind. Their rented house on Maple Street had seen better days. The porch sagged slightly, and the windows whistled when the wind picked up, which it did, often and without mercy. Inside, boxes remained half unpacked, as if the family wasn't quite ready to admit this was home now. Photos of Richard's father, a decorated soldier who'd died in combat overseas, sat proudly on the mantel, the only decor they'd bothered to arrange properly. Samuel Wilson ran the town's animal shelter from an old converted gas station at the edge of town, at 65. He had the weathered face of someone who'd seen it all and hadn't been particularly impressed. His shelter operated on donations and his Social Security checks when those ran dry. The locals respected Sam, even if they thought his dedication to lost causes, particularly the older animals, was somewhat foolish. Then there was Major, though nobody called him that yet. At the back of Wilson's shelter, in a kennel barely warmed by an ancient space heater, lay an 11-year-old German shepherd with a graying muzzle and eyes that had seen too much. His back left leg didn't work right, giving him a pronounced limp. Scars mapped his body beneath his dull coat, telling stories of a hard life. The shelter staff walked him last, fed him last, and mentioned him least when potential adopters came by. They'd seen too many old dogs left behind to foster false hope. No one wanted an elderly dog, especially not one that looked like it might die before winter's end. Emily Parker didn't mean to end up at the animal shelter that Tuesday afternoon. Her school's community service program had assigned her to the public library, but a burst pipe had sent water cascading through the reference section, and the coordinator had hastily reassigned volunteers. That's how Emily, who had been afraid of dogs since a neighbor's Rottweiler knocked her down when she was 5, found herself clutching a clipboard at Samuel Wilson's shelter. "You'll be checking inventory, Mr. Wilson told her, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Dog food, blankets, cleaning supplies. Nothing too complicated." He handed her a set of keys. "Last room's storage. Don't bother with the kennels in the back wing. Those dogs are—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Not adoption priorities." Emily nodded, grateful she wouldn't have to interact with any animals. For an hour, she counted cans and measured detergent, the monotony almost comforting. When she finished, curiosity pulled her toward the sound of occasional barking from the back wing. Just a peek? she told herself. The kennel area was dimly lit, with a row of cages lining one wall. Most contained energetic younger dogs who pressed their noses against the chain link when she passed. But at the very end, in a kennel slightly apart from the others, lay what Emily first thought was a bundle of old blankets. Then the blankets moved. A pair of deep brown eyes, clouded slightly with age but startlingly intelligent, met hers. The German Shepherd didn't bark or wag its tail. It simply watched her, with a dignity that seemed at odds with its surroundings. "That's our old man," said a voice behind her. Mr. Wilson stood in the doorway. "Been here 3 months. Nobody wants a senior dog, especially one with issues." He gestured to a clipboard hanging on the kennel door. Emily's stomach dropped when she saw the red mark in the corner, the euthanasia schedule. "Tomorrow," she whispered. Wilson nodded. "No point keeping him longer. Resources are tight, and he's taking up space a younger dog could use." The German Shepherd hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. But as Emily looked back at him, he slowly, painfully, rose to his feet and limped to the front of the kennel. No begging, no whining, just a quiet presence. "Does he have a name?" Emily asked. "Paperwork says Major, but we just call him Old Man." Wilson turned to leave. "Finish up your hours in the front office." That night at dinner, Emily couldn't eat. The thought of those eyes, that quiet dignity, haunted her. "There's this dog," she finally blurted out. "Absolutely not," Sarah Parker said firmly, setting down her fork. "Emily, we've talked about this. We can barely afford to feed ourselves right now." Emily pushed her mashed potatoes around her plate. "They're going to kill him tomorrow." "That's unfortunate," Richard said, his voice gentler than his wife's. "But rescue dogs cost money, vet bills, food, supplies. We just don't have it." Mike snorted from across the table. "Plus, you're scared of dogs. Remember when you cried because Mrs. Henderson's poodle barked at you?" "This one's different," Emily insisted. "He doesn't bark. He just looks at you." Richard exchanged glances with Sarah. Their daughter rarely showed passion about anything since the move. "What kind of dog is it?" he asked, ignoring his wife's warning look. "A German Shepherd, old, with a bad leg. His name is Major." Richard froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "Major German Shepherd." Emily nodded. "He has scars all over. Mr. Wilson says nobody wants him because he's too old and broken." Richard set his fork down slowly. German Shepherds had been his father's favorite. He'd grown up hearing stories about the military working dogs that served alongside soldiers like his dad. Did Wilson mention where the dog came from? Just that someone dropped him off. There was a tag, but nobody claimed him. Later that night, after the kids went to bed, Richard pulled out an old cigar box from his closet shelf. Inside lay his father's effects medals, letters, dog tags, and a few photographs. One showed James Parker standing in desert fatigues, a young German Shepherd at his side. The dog wore a tactical vest with Major stenciled on the side. "It can't be the same dog," he muttered to himself. "Dad's dog would be ancient by now, if still alive." The next morning, Richard arrived at the shelter 20 minutes before opening time. Samuel Wilson was shoveling snow from the walkway. "We're not open yet," Wilson called. "I'm here about the German Shepherd. Major." Wilson leaned on his shovel. "Your daughter worked fast, but I'm sorry that dog's scheduled for today." "I just want to see him." Inside, the old dog was exactly as Emily described: graying muzzle, scarred body, damaged leg. But when the German Shepherd's eyes met Richard's, he saw something that made his breath catch. Recognition. Not of Richard himself, but of something in him. Richard crouched down. "Hey there, old-timer." The dog limped forward, not with excitement but with purpose. when Richard cautiously extended his hand. Major did something that sealed both their fates. He dropped his head and placed it in Richard's palm. "What's his story?" Richard asked, not looking up. Wilson shrugged. "Military dog. From what little we know, his tags had a service number, but the records were incomplete. Been through at least 3 homes since retirement. Last family said he kept escaping, like he was looking for something." The veterinarian's office smelled of antiseptic and wet dog. Major sat stoically as Dr. Hernandez examined him, not flinching even when gentle fingers probed his injured leg. "Military working dog, no doubt about it," the vet confirmed, pointing to a small tattoo inside Major's ear. "This is a service number. Germans. Shepherds like him were the backbone of tactical K-9 units. His leg shows evidence of shrapnel damage, probably from an IED. Richard nodded, thinking of his father who'd died in similar circumstances. "Can you tell how old he is? Around 11, maybe 12? Ancient for a working dog?" Dr. Hernandez's expression softened. "Mr. Parker, I should warn you this isn't going to be a long-term adoption. Given his age and injuries, you might have a year or 2 at most." "I understand," Richard said quietly, "but no one deserves to die alone." The return to the Parker household with Major was met with mixed reactions. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line. Mike slouched behind her, rolling his eyes. Only Emily rushed forward, though she stopped a cautious distance from the dog. "You actually did it," Sarah said, disbelief coloring her voice. "Richard, we talked about this." "We'll make it work," Richard replied, unclipping Major's leash. The dog didn't bound into the house or explore his new surroundings. Instead, he sat at Richard's side, alert and awaiting instructions. That first week tested everyone's patience. Sarah worked double shifts to cover the unexpected vet bills. Mike complained about the dog hair on the furniture and the way Major watched him. Like some kind of furry drill sergeant. Only Emily and Richard seemed to connect with the old shepherd. At night, Major would drag his bed with considerable effort due to his injured leg from the living room to position it across Emily's bedroom doorway. No amount of coaxing would move him once he'd settled there. "It's what he was trained to do," Richard explained. "Military dogs protect their people." What they couldn't explain was Major's other peculiar behavior. Each morning, they'd find one of Emily's stuffed animals carefully placed at her door, as if on guard duty. When Richard had nightmares about his deployment, which happened with increasing frequency since losing his job, Major would appear at his bedside, silent but present, staying until Richard's breathing evened out. The neighbors' reactions complicated matters further. "Waste of money," Richard overheard Mrs. Abernathy telling Sarah at the grocery store. "Putting down good food and medicine on a dog that's practically got one paw in the grave already." Even Samuel Wilson, who'd waived the adoption fee, seemed skeptical. "That dog's been looking for something," he told Richard. "Don't be surprised if he takes off. Military dogs are single-minded that way." 1 month after Major's arrival, the family faced their first major test. Richard's unemployment benefits were running out, and Sarah's nursing salary barely covered their mortgage. The heating bill arrived with a red warning stamp. "We could ask my parents for help," Sarah suggested late one night, her voice barely a whisper over the kitchen table. "No," Richard said firmly. His pride was one of the few things unemployment hadn't taken from him. "Then something has to give. Richard, and I'm sorry, but Major—" A soft whine interrupted her. Major stood in the kitchen doorway, a photograph held gently between his teeth. He limped forward and placed it on the floor between them. Richard picked it up with trembling fingers. It was the photo of his father with a military working dog, one he'd thought was safely stored in his cigar box. The resemblance between that young dog and their aged Major was striking, despite the years between. "How did he find this?" Sarah whispered. That night. Richard searched through his father's belongings again. Among the medals and letters, he found a folded document he'd never properly examined, transfer papers for a military working dog with a service number that matched the tattoo in Major's ear. The dog had indeed served with his father's unit. The knock at the door came early on a Saturday morning. Richard opened it to find a tall man in uniform, frost clinging to his military-issue coat. "Lieutenant Colonel James Reeves," the man said, extending a gloved hand. "I'm with the Military Working Dog Program at Fort Harrison. I understand you have one of our assets." Richard felt his stomach tighten. "Former assets. Major's retired." "May I come in?" Reeves didn't wait for an answer. Stepping into the warmth of the house, Major emerged from Emily's room, moving with surprising speed despite his limp. He stopped short at the sight of the uniform, standing at attention despite his aged frame. "Still remembers his training," Reeves noted with approval. "German Shepherds are remarkable animals." In the kitchen, over coffee that no one touched, Reeves laid out a folder of documents. Service dog 5429M, call sign Major, was reported missing in action overseas 6 years ago. His handler was killed in the same engagement. The dog was presumed dead until he surfaced in a shelter in Oregon 3 years ago. "Then why wasn't he properly retired?" Richard asked, struggling to keep his voice even. "Given to his handler's family." "The handler had no family that we could locate. As for retirement..." Reeves straightened some invisible wrinkle in his uniform. "Major was evaluated and deemed suitable for reassignment. He was placed with a training officer who later reported him as having run away. He's been through several homes since, always escaping." Sarah folded her arms. "So you lost track of him until my husband adopted him from a kill shelter. And now, suddenly, he's valuable again." "These dogs represent a significant investment by the military. Mrs. Parker, their training costs..." "He's 11 years old," Richard interrupted. "What possible use could he be? Breeding program." Reeves's tone was matter-of-fact. "Major's line produced exceptional working dogs. We've recently located some of his DNA samples in storage. With advances in reproductive technology, he's not a machine." Emily's voice came from the doorway where she stood in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "He's our dog." Reeves' expression softened slightly at the sight of the crying child, but his resolve remained firm. "I'm afraid that legally, he remains military property. I have the paperwork here for his surrender." He slid a document across the table. "I can give you until Monday to say your goodbyes." After Reeves left, the house fell silent except for Emily's muffled sobs from her bedroom. Major had taken up his usual position across her doorway, as if standing guard against further threats. That afternoon, Richard found Emily in the basement, Major at her side. The dog had been pawing at an old section of wall, his attention fixed on something no one else could see. "He keeps doing this," Emily said, wiping tear-streaked cheeks. "Like he's trying to tell us something." Richard examined the wall. The house was old, built in the 1950s, with additions made in later decades. This section looked newer than the rest. On impulse, he pressed against it, feeling a slight give. Behind the drywall was a small cavity, a forgotten storage space. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, lay a box of military medals, photographs, and journals. James Parker, Sr. His name was written on the cover of the topmost journal. Richard's father had hidden his most treasured possessions here, in a house the family had only recently moved into. "Dad never lived here," Richard whispered in confusion. But as he flipped through the journal, the truth emerged in his father's handwriting, "Purchased the house on Maple Street today. Hope to move the family there when my tour ends. It's perfect for Richard and the grandkids he'll have someday." Major watched intently as Richard uncovered evidence that his father had bought this house years ago as a surprise for the family, a surprise death had prevented him from delivering. "He wasn't just any dog to your unit, was he?" Richard asked, looking at Major. "You were my father's dog." The weekend passed in a blur of desperate phone calls. Richard contacted veterans advocacy groups, local politicians, and even his former commanding officer, but the answer was always the same. Military working dogs were classified as equipment, not personnel. Major legally belonged to the Army. Sunday night. Emily insisted on sleeping on the floor beside Major's bed. "I'm not leaving him alone," she declared, her small face set with determination that reminded Richard painfully of his father. "Just one night," Sarah said softly, tucking a blanket around her daughter. The fight had gone out of her once she'd seen the journals. The connection between the dog and her husband's family. Monday morning arrived with heavy snow and heavier hearts. Emily hadn't slept well, tossing and mumbling throughout the night while Major kept vigilant watch. When Richard went to wake her for school, he found her burning with fever. "Mom," he called, panic rising in his throat as Emily failed to respond to her name. Sarah's nursing training took over. "Her temperature's 104, she reported, reaching for her phone. "Call an ambulance. This isn't normal." What happened next would later be described by the paramedics as remarkable animal behavior. As the EMTs loaded Emily onto a stretcher, Major became agitated, barking for the first time since joining the household. He positioned himself at Emily's head, refusing to move even when the lead paramedic tried to shoo him away. "Sir, you need to control your dog," the man told Richard firmly. "Wait," Sarah interjected, watching Major's behavior. "He's not being aggressive. He's trying to tell us something." The old shepherd was focused intently on Emily's face, particularly her eyes, which had begun to flutter rapidly beneath closed lids. "She's seizing," the second paramedic shouted, just as Major had started barking again. In the emergency room, the diagnosis came swiftly: encephalitis, a dangerous inflammation of the brain that had triggered the seizure. "She could have died if you'd waited even a few more hours," the doctor told them gravely. Most parents miss the subtle signs. "How did you know to bring her in?" Richard and Sarah exchanged looks. "Our dog," Richard said simply. He knew. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves arrived at the hospital that afternoon, crisp and official in his dress uniform. Richard met him in the hallway outside Emily's room, where she lay sleeping with IVs running into her thin arms. "I've come for the dog," Reeves stated, though his eyes softened slightly at Richard's haggard appearance. "I heard about your daughter. I'm sorry." Major detected her seizure before it happened, Richard said quietly. "The doctors say it saved her life." Reeves's expression didn't change. That's not uncommon in these dogs. Some develop an ability to sense changes in body chemistry that precede medical events, which makes him even more valuable to you, I suppose. "Mr. Parker, I have my orders." Richard looked through the doorway at his daughter. "He's not at our house. When the ambulance came, he refused to leave Emily's side. The hospital made an exception when we explained the situation. He's under her bed right now." Reeves frowned. "In the hospital against regulations, surely." "Sir, I lost my father to war. I nearly lost my daughter today. I'm not letting you take the dog that connects them, the dog that saved her life." The lieutenant colonel studied Richard's face for a long moment. "The military doesn't make exceptions." "Mr. Parker, then I guess you'll have to arrest me because I'm not giving him up." Lieutenant Colonel Reeves stood silent for a long moment in the sterile hospital hallway. "I'll need to make some calls," he finally said, turning on his heel. While Emily recovered in the pediatric ward, Major became something of a celebrity. Nurses snuck him treats, despite official prohibitions against animals. Dr. Hernandez, who had first examined Major at his clinic, provided documentation recommending the dog remain as a therapeutic necessity for Emily's recovery. On the third day of Emily's hospitalization, Reeves returned with an older man in an expensive suit and the unmistakable bearing of a lifetime military officer. "General Wilson Carter," the man introduced himself to Richard. "I'm here about your situation." In Emily's room, with Major lying vigilant beneath her bed, General Carter examined the photographs and journals Richard had found in the basement wall. "I served with your father," Carter said, his weathered fingers tracing James Parker Sr.'s signature. "He saved my life in Kandahar. Did he ever tell you that story?" Richard shook his head. "Dad didn't talk much about his deployments. He wouldn't. Too humble." Carter's eyes drifted to Major. "That dog was everything to him. James trained him personally, against regulations. Said Major was special, could sense things other dogs couldn't." "Like seizures," Sarah whispered, holding Emily's hand. Carter nodded. "Among other things, your father's last mission," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "was classified. The official report says he died protecting his unit. What it doesn't say is that he sent Major ahead with vital intelligence strapped to his vest. The dog made it back to base despite severe injuries, saved 37 lives that day." Richard felt his throat tighten. If he was such a hero, why was he abandoned? Politics, budget cuts, a new administration with different priorities. Carter's disgust was evident. "By the time I learned Major had been reassigned rather than retired honorably, he'd already disappeared from the program. Been searching for him ever since. Off the books. For breeding." Richard couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "No, for this." Carter produced a sealed envelope from his jacket. "Your father left this with me, along with instructions that if anything happened to him, Major was to go to you. The dog's mission was always to find your family." Richard broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a deed to the house on Maple Street, the house they were now renting, along with a substantial life insurance policy that had never been claimed. The documents were accompanied by a handwritten note. "Son, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. The house is yours. I bought it years ago, hoping we'd all live there someday. Major knows where everything important is hidden. Trust him. He'll protect you and your family the way he protected me. Love, Dad." "These papers were filed but never processed correctly," Carter explained. "When your father died, the notification went to an old address. Major was supposed to be released to your custody immediately, but the paperwork was overlooked during a reorganization at the Pentagon. So all these years..." Richard couldn't finish the sentence. "He's been trying to complete his final mission," Carter finished. "Finding you." The general turned to Reeves. "Lieutenant Colonel, I'm issuing a direct order. Military Working Dog 5429M is officially retired with honors, effective immediately. His ownership transfers to the Parker family as per his handler's legal request." He handed Reeves a document with official seals. "The paperwork will catch up to my decision." Emily, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, reached down to touch Major's head. "Does this mean he can stay with us forever?" "Yes, sweetheart." General Carter smiled. "That dog has earned his retirement. In fact..." He reached into his pocket and produced a set of official-looking dog tags. "These belong to him. Your grandfather would want him to have them back." As Richard fastened the tags around Major's neck, the pieces of the puzzle finally fit together. The dog's determination to reach their house, his protective behavior toward Emily, the way he'd found the hidden compartment with his father's belongings. His father's last orders had been carried out by the one soldier who would never give up the mission finding and protecting the Parker family. Spring came to Redwood Falls, melting away the bitter winter. In the backyard of the house on Maple Street, now legally the Parkers' home, Richard built a wheelchair ramp for those days when Major's leg pained him too much to manage the steps. The old German Shepherd had his own orthopedic bed in the living room, though he still spent most nights guarding Emily's doorway. The insurance money had allowed Richard to take his time finding suitable work. When the local VA hospital advertised for a coordinator of a new service dog program for veterans with PTSD, it seemed like fate. Now he spent his days helping soldiers connect with dogs that could sense the invisible wounds of war, just as Major had sensed Emily's illness. "He's limping more today," Sarah observed one Saturday morning as Major made his slow way to the kitchen for breakfast. Her initial reluctance to keep the elderly dog had transformed into fierce protectiveness. She'd become an expert in canine joint supplements and pain management. "The vet says it's arthritis, not his old injury," Richard replied, watching as Emily carefully measured Major's senior dog food. "He's comfortable, though. That's what matters." Mike, who had once complained loudest about Major's presence, was now often found sprawled on the floor beside the dog, confiding teenage troubles that he wouldn't share with his parents. "The old man gets it," he'd shrug when caught in these one-sided conversations. Samuel Wilson from the shelter visited occasionally, always bringing some special treat for Major. "Never seen a dog so determined," he'd say, shaking his head in wonder, like he had a purpose bigger than just surviving. The story of Major's journey had spread beyond Redwood Falls. A local newspaper article about the military dog who found his handler's family caught national attention. Veterans groups rallied around the story, using it to advocate for better treatment of service animals after retirement. State Senator Eleanor Jenkins visited personally to announce new legislation, Major's Law, ensuring military working dogs would be offered first to their handlers' families before any reassignment. "These animals aren't equipment," she declared for the cameras. "They're heroes who deserve to come home." On a warm June evening, as fireflies began to light up the yard, the Parkers hosted a small gathering. General Carter was there, along with Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, now a supporter of Major's Law, Samuel Wilson, and several of Richard's new colleagues from the VA program. Emily sat on the porch steps, Major's gray head resting in her lap. She no longer feared dogs. In fact, she'd started volunteering at Wilson's shelter every Saturday. "Dad says you're the bravest soldier he's ever known," she whispered to Major, who thumped his tail weakly in response. They both knew his time was growing shorter, but there was no sadness in Emily's voice, only gratitude. Inside, Richard found his father's journal, which he'd taken to reading each night. The final entry, written just days before James Parker Sr. His last mission seemed especially poignant now. A man can leave many legacies in this world, but the most important isn't what he owns or even what he accomplishes. It's the love he leaves behind, and the protection he provides for those who will carry on without him. In that way, I think Major and I are the same two old soldiers doing our duty until the very end. Richard looked out the window at his daughter and the faithful dog who had completed his mission against all odds. Major had found his way home, and in doing so, had helped the Parker family find theirs as well. The unwanted elderly dog had given them the greatest gift of all, the understanding that the bonds of loyalty and love transcend time, distance, and even death itself. As we grow older, we understand what it means to be overlooked, to have the world see our gray hairs and weathered faces instead of the strength and wisdom inside us. Major's story reminds us that true value isn't measured in youth or perfection. This loyal German Shepherd, cast aside because of his age and scars, proved that our twilight years can hold our greatest purpose. Like many of us who served our country, raised families, or built communities, Major's most meaningful contribution came not in his prime, but in his sunset days. His determination to complete one final mission to unite a broken family and deliver a father's last gift of love speaks to what matters most at our stage of life. It's never too late to fulfill our purpose. It's never too late to find our way home. and it's never too late to be the guardian angel someone needs. Major's legacy teaches us that the marks of age are limps, are scars. Our gray hair aren't signs of diminishing worth, but badges of honor earned through a life of faithful service. In a world that worships youth, remember sometimes the oldest hearts have the most love left to give. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.